And again, welcome to everybody to this Thursday evening satsang. And this is traditionally we have on Thursdays, we have it's a Gita satsang. And I've chosen for today's reading, chapter 2, verses 62 and 63. And I think it's a very familiar one that I think we'll all recognize. And so Krishna is saying to Arjuna here, he says, if one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames to anger. From anger there arises infatuation, the delusion that one object alone is worth clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. And from forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty. And when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual path. And as we can see here, it's a slippery slope we find ourselves on. And this reading from the Gita is something for all of us to keep in mind. And, you know, as many of you know, on Sundays in many of the Ananda centers, on the satsangs that take place on Sunday morning, or sometimes Sunday evening, we often read from the readings of Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda when he discusses parallel passages from the Bhagavad Gita and from the Bible. And last Sunday there was a discussion I'm here at the Ananda Village right now, and the discussion on Sunday was about Judas Iscariot, and in reference to the Bible, and how we know that Judas Iscariot, he was the disciple of Jesus Christ who betrayed him, who basically betrayed him to the soldiers of the Roman Empire, and ultimately at the behest of the priests of the Jewish priests, and leading to his execution, his martyrdom, his crucifixion. And the question comes up naturally is why would somebody like Judas do something like that? Here, because actually Judas had to be a very high soul to be one of the disciples of Jesus Christ, and he was one of the ones that was he is said to be very magnetic in his personality, and yet it came to pass that he ended up betraying Christ. In a sense, you could say he fell spiritually. He fell, and you could say this. I think this one thing here, the generation or the discriminative faculty, and when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. And so you have this situation where somebody, all of a sudden, they go against their own inner calling of wanting of God, and they fall. But I think, you know, when we talk about falling on the spiritual path, that's kind of dramatic. You know, the story of Jesus is very dramatic, and I don't think that really applies to very few people are that dramatic. But I do think that all of us should take that and keep it in mind, because all of us fall off from our spiritual pursuits, and it's inevitable that we fall off, because we wouldn't have been here so long, incarnation after incarnation, trying to find God. Why does it take so long? It's because again and again we start up and we seek, and we fall off back, we backslide, we go back to old ways, old habits, and we continually fall off. And so the idea of falling off, of, you might say, our degeneration of our spiritual pursuits, in a smaller ways at least, it happens again and again. And sometimes it's even daily. We're very aspiring in one moment, And the next thing you know, anger comes in, something comes in, and we get distracted, and we're going up and down. And it's so I think we just have to look at it. It's a matter of scale. But I think one thing that comes out of this is the realization that all of us stumble and fall at some point in little ways, in big ways. And so it's not something that we should be surprised at. It's not obviously something we should necessarily cavalierly accept it, that we shouldn't try not to do that, but it's going to happen. And so there's a certain amount of compassion when other people that are necessary, when other people fall off, and because we do it too. And I think that compassion for ourselves is due as well. And the important thing is to get up, again. We fall how many times? Again and again and again. And we shouldn't, as Swami used to say, never call yourself a failure. Rather, you just have not succeeded yet. But nevertheless, we don't want to keep doing this because it's painful. Usually we fall, that something happens and we fall off and we just feel regretful. And there's a correlation between spiritual falling off, of stumbling, and pain. It's like when you stumble, you hit the ground and it's painful. And so we want to see what we can do and be aware of it and try to avoid it. But yet, it's going to happen, but it's necessary for us to develop those qualities in ourselves that we can catch it before it gets too long. You could sort of say most people don't all of a sudden stumble so dramatically, like the story of Judas, as I said. And I also notice it's usually not something that happens all of a sudden. There's a slow process. Slowly, our spiritual aspirations begin to fade. We think we're going along just fine, but then it's slowly we find ourselves, what happened? We look around and we can see that something's missing. Sometimes we don't even know it's missing, but if we can develop that quality of being self-aware enough, that ability to introspect and keep track, and we can begin to see it and looking for those danger signs that appear, and we'll get into those in a moment. But we see this all the time, and I have been a Kriyacharya. It's been my observation that it's only a minority of Kriyabans who stick with their practices for a lifetime. I have to say that. It's not something I like to say, but it's inevitable to some degree. I've come to accept it. I don't think it's inevitable, but I do come to accept it, that most people, they're very enthusiastic, they get their practices really going, and they'll go for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and slowly other things begin to intrude in their life. And I've noticed many times, the hundreds and the thousands of people that take Kriya, how many really for a lifetime? That's a great feat. I think many of you have been able to accomplish that, to stick with it. But we know that the 100 people that come a year or two later, where are they? They've disappeared. Now, I will say, I accept it, and and is somewhat of an inevitability, and we keep trying. I think Ananda Sangha, one of our primary jobs in Ananda Sangha, is to try to find ways to inspire devotees to continue, to support them in ways so that they don't fall off. But I've also noticed this. Many people, they fall off, but they come back after a period of time. It's like lifetime after lifetime, we come back again and again. Well, on the positive side too, even Kriyabans, when they stop practicing, I will say that most, and this is the important point, most retain their sense of discipleship. And I think it's just, and that's the important thing, not to lose our connection with Guru. And even if we're not practicing as well as we should have, I think that's the most important thing, because if we keep the Guru as our disciple, that keep that connection of life, we'll overcome all these temporary obstacles. And so yes, people, they fall off their practices, but I do think once people become disciples, most stick with that. Now, there was I always liked that story of Senor Cuaron. He was from Mexico, and he was the leader of uh, Yoganandaji's work in Mexico City. And when Mr. Cuaron met Master, he was immediately, so you could say he almost remembered him from the past life. And Master said, "Oh, Senor Cuaron, I lost sight of you for a few incarnations." In other words, I don't think it was so much that Master lost sight of Mr. Cuaron, but it was rather Mr. Cuaron lost sight of Master. But anyway, be that as it may, he said, "I lost sight of you for a few lifetimes." And Mr. Cuaron said, "Master," and he was very sincere. He says, "Please promise me that you will never lose sight of me again." And Master, I think it took him a little time, but he promised him. He says, "No, I won't lose sight of you again." But of course, it was up to Mr. Cuaron to make sure that happened. But Mr. Cuaron, every time he saw Master, when he would go back to Mexico City, he'd come back to Los Angeles, where Master was. He says, "Master, remember your promise." He says, "Oh no, I won't remember my promise. I won't forget my promise." And Mr. Cuaron turned out to be a very, very deep soul. But the thing is, when we speak about people falling away from their spiritual practice, and use it as a cautionary reminder to ourselves to keep ourselves motivated, keep that discipleship. That's the most important point. Keeping Master near, even if we're not doing very well. Just say, "Master, you're with me, help me," and that is the important thing. But rarely, in my observation, if I introspect and I see the times when I've been, slacking, you might say, rarely is it one single event that turns us away from our spiritual pursuits. And when I've seen that in other folks as well, it's usually a gradual erosion, perhaps on many fronts. We start to erode. Maybe sometimes we hardly even know it's happening. And that's why it's good to have satsang, good to have spiritual friends, because others maybe can remind us, and they, of course, inspire us to keep going. But it's a gradual thing. And this is the essence of the Gita reading. It's one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, until ultimately the complete annihilation of our spiritual life. Oh my God. And our interests are pulled in other directions little by little. We go in the wrong direction. But the interesting thing is we all sometimes are not really aware of it, because we think, "Oh, this is great. Everything's fine. And maybe I'm prospering even. I think I'm doing really great." And we reinforce that. There's, it's like we think that something seems to feel good, and therefore it's the right thing to do. But it's not always that case. You can do things that feel good, but deep down, you know that they're not good for you. That's the wrong direction. And there was a story I told recently elsewhere that there was a fellow who was under the delusion. This is Swami used to tell this story, and he says he came under delusion that he could fly. He thought he was deluded and he could fly, and so he went up to the top of a very large building, maybe let's say 20 stories up, and he got onto the roof there, and he was going to demonstrate how he could fly. And he jumps off the roof, and he begins to go down. And he's partway down, and a fellow in the building looks out the window and sees him falling, and he says, "How are you doing?" Because he had said he could fly. "How are you doing?" And the fellow who's falling down, he says, "So far, so good." In other words, until, of course, he hit the bottom, then it wasn't so good. And we think all is well. It feels really good until splat, you're on the pavement. And this is how it can be. We forget. And all of these things that slowly begin to erode, and then all of a sudden we realize, "Oh my gosh, what happened? I never even hardly saw it coming." But if you look back and you introspect, you begin to see you had been, perhaps we dilute ourselves, we dilute it with wrong understanding. But if we use this power of introspection, which is, by the way, we have weekly affirmations and prayers also that for each week. That's the reading for this week, introspection, the prayer for this week. To look within ourselves, to be able to see the signs that maybe something is not going right, the danger signs. And I think one of the things you might say that correlates is for many people, it's a certain indifference. Watch for that. Are you becoming, because the spiritual path is an aspirational endeavor. Our energy has to be aspiring and being positively going into what we're aspiring toward. And it's hard to keep that energy going at many times, but to the degree that we find ourselves in time coasting along, you might say, on past momentum, but we're not putting that momentum or that energy into it right now, and that eventually it begins to turn into an indifference. And I think this is one of the most insidious obstacles on the spiritual path, is to just not care anymore. We begin to lack a certain enthusiasm. We just don't care about this, don't care about that. And yes, maybe we do our practices, but there's no energy to it. There's no aspirational energy. And this is something that happens to many people. Probably all devotees to some degree or another experience this. And I've often noticed that, have you ever noticed how young people tend to be more idealistic than people who get to be middle-aged or maybe even elderly? Because ideals, somehow there's a youthfulness that, and when you're youthful, you're idealistic. Now, same thing with the spiritual path. When we're young in the spiritual endeavor, we're new to the path. We have this great aspirational energy, and in time we begin to see, oh my God, this is this is a deep, long-lasting journey that I'm going to be on here. And you begin to realize you have to put that energy constantly. Many people want very quick results. They want to boil the water within an instant, so now, that you get the microwave, and so it's really quick, to get that dinner cooked. Well, the spiritual path isn't like that. I mean, yes, we practice the techniques. Yes, we do our kriyas, and you could say, Master said it's the jet plane route to God, but it's really, when we start looking at it, there's a lot of work that has to be done there. So indifference, and we have to then, if we see that, we have to summon up the tools. And usually that main tool is devotion, because what goes with indifference? A lack of devotional energy, a lack of aspiration, which is aspiration, really, devotion and aspiration, and putting our energy into that aspiration in a sustaining way is devotion. Or you could say it's a lack of spiritual energy, a sort of a laziness of just coasting without really putting focus, as you would perhaps when you first started out. And I think the thing to also watch out for, and that goes with indifference, and maybe you could even say this is one of the things to help cure, is I think people, when they begin to lose their fervor, they become attracted more and more to worldly environments, things of the world. Now, I'm not saying bad things of the world, but things that are less, you might say, idealistically spiritual, because the old habits from the past begin to reassert themselves. We come onto the spiritual path and we think, oh, I left that in the past. Old habits are just sleeping. It takes a long time to get rid of those. And you start to find you begin to be attracted to those environments that stimulate those samskars that are lying dormant. And they're still there, but they're just dormant. And a little bit of energy, when we are indifferent, you see, indifference, you might say, you've taken your eyes off the goal of where you want to go, and you started to let them roam around elsewhere because there's a magnetism there, and that magnetism enters in. You could say indifference leaves the door open for other influences to come in. We're hardly even aware of it. But pretty soon, if you have a lot of other influences coming in, you become attracted to them. We could say we start to water the seeds of old samskars that are going to take us in directions that we don't really want to go. And so pay attention to the environments. And I mean that environments, not just the physical environments, but the mental environment more than the physical environment. Although physical environment will rub off on us and stimulate it, the mental, but it's that mental attractions that begin to draw us. And if we see that, that's one of the first signs. I'm going to catch it. And we have to then put positive energy into the other. Now, I know I've been doing this long enough to see the ups and downs in my own life, and they're reflected in my daily practices, in my sadhana. And I feel I'm kind of on a plateau. You have to then make extra effort to I was noticing, and maybe this is even one reason I chose this topic. I noticed that my life had become very complicated with duties of various sorts that I have arising in my own life, things that I've got to take care of. And I noticed that I've always tried to make it a point to at least once a week have a long meditation. And I noticed that I haven't been I've been too busy. You could say, I say that. Have I really been that busy? No, but I've let myself become engulfed in busyness, you might say. And so last night I said, no, there's a 3-hour meditation every once a week here. Well, there's more than one, but there's one during the midweek when I'm not engaged elsewhere. And I said, I'm going to start going again. And I've started going to those meditations. And it reminds me, we have to just look for ways to keep ourselves engaged. Okay. And have another, you might say, thing to be aware of. And Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, mentions this. It's Swami Kriyananda used to mention it this way, and you could say it's translated as missing the point. Is we take up the spiritual path, but we miss, and we, in our day-to-day efforts, what we're trying to do, we miss the point. Spirituality, you could say, is we take it up for the wrong reasons, you might say. We miss the point of what it's all about. Oftentimes, it's not just about going to satsang on a regular basis, which I very much recommend. It's not about certain outward duties. It's not about form. Spirituality is about that inner attunement that we try to have with God and Guru. And why are we doing this? Why did I take this up in the first place? And it's good to reflect on that. What was my motivation? Well, I wanted, probably on some level, I wanted to overcome suffering. I wanted my life to change for the better. And remember that, because otherwise we can miss the point. And certainly if you look at the life of Judas Iscariot, he obviously missed the point. He probably saw Jesus in a very outward, material way as a Messiah to perhaps free the Jewish people from the Roman domination in an outward political sense. And to miss the point, spirituality can be looked upon, yes, to do good works is a good thing to do, but it's more than doing good works. But if we substitute just good action for the spirit behind that action, why do we do action? Do good action is to put ourselves in attunement with God, put ourselves in attunement with God and Guru. And I think all of the things, really, if you say what draws us away and we begin to fall away, probably all of them could be categorized under the topic of losing our attunement with God and Guru, being out of tune. And that's a very nebulous thing to define, to be in tune, harmonizing, being in harmony with God. Being in attunement with God is to vibrate, feel God and Guru vibrating within us. And I think, what is the essence of attunement really? And I think it's love, to be actively feeling God's love. And of course, love, we feel God's love, but the way to feel God's love, to feel that attunement, is to give that love. To give love to, are we loving? Are we actively engaging in that practice of devotional love for God? And I think the other thing too is, what did Master say about attunement? He says, if you want to be in tune with me, serve my work. Now, I don't think he meant that organizationally, to be a cog in the wheel of an organization, but he meant to dedicate ourselves to accomplishing what he was trying to accomplish. I told this story recently to a different group of people, and years ago, I took that, I had heard that saying, be in tune, and be in tune, be in tune. Swamiji used to emphasize that. He said that's what Master emphasized to the disciples, not publicly. He said in his public discourse, he didn't talk about attunement too much, but that's all he talked about when he spoke to the disciples, be in tune, be in tune. And of course, how to be in tune was what the essence of discipleship was about. And he said, then he had that phrase, if you want to be in tune with me, serve my work. And serve and I asked Swamiji, or I and others asked in the group, we asked him, Swamiji, how do we be in tune? How do we be in tune with you? We wanted to be, he is a disciple. How do we be in tune with you? And he was in a little bit of voice of frustration. He says, now, because we were, talking about attunement in an outer way. And he says, remember, it's not about me. You're not being in tune with me, this personality, who I am, what my traits and my qualities are. That's not what we're talking about. It's not about me. It's about being in tune with what the flow that's trying to happen, Master's flow. And he said, and so we pestered him, said, well, practically, what do we do? And he said, think about what if you want to be in tune with me, what am I trying to do with my life? I'm trying to serve Guru. I'm trying to make his teachings, his name known. He said, that's what my life is dedicated to, that. And he says, I'm trying to do that. So if you want to be in tune with me, help me accomplish what I'm trying to do, and serve with me, be with me, serve the work I'm trying to serve, and serve it in the spirit that I'm trying to serve it. Now I'm elaborating a little bit beyond what he said, but when he said that, I came to understand that's what it is. It's not about being like, Swami is a great musician. I was not a musician. Swami was a great singer. I wasn't a great singer. Swami is a great public speaker. I wasn't a great public speaker. I compared myself outwardly, and I just said, well, I must be out of tune. And he said, no, it's none of that. It's not about wearing certain clothes, reciting things in a certain way. It's about serving in the right spirit. And that's what I took up, and I learned something from that. And so I think all of these things is, are we falling out of tune? Are we able to stay in tune? But how do we do that? The essence of attunement is harmony, attuning ourselves with the ray of a harmonious ray. You could say harmony is being attuned is being on the same wavelength, harmonizing. And what is the best way to harmonize? Love is the epitome of being in harmony with something. Love is the essence of attunement. And so I think these are things we need to keep in mind using our introspection. So in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali mentions a whole list of these obstacles, and I can refer you there. You can go deeper into this, but he talks about vanity, arrogance, self-conceit, wrath, harshness, ignorance, all of these things. But these are the things we have to keep in mind and try to introspect. But I would start with that one I started with, is indifference and the lack of devotion. Because when those start to fade, that's a sure sign that something's off. And of course, we have to then summon up in all the tools that we're being given to bring ourselves back in tune. What do we really want in life? Remember, why did we come onto the spiritual path? Don't be too mental about it. Try to feel inspiration in whatever way you can. Then the inspiration will guide you, and you'll find that that little by little, if you can remember why you came on the spiritual path in the first place, you can keep that alive, keep watering it. You might it's growing a little plant. And remember, I think as a cautionary, we're never safe until we are, as is what Master said, you're never safe until we're in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. We're always subject, because the environment that we live in, this world is made in such a way that would slowly pulls us away. But we don't need to be afraid of it. And I think our bodyguard, as long as remember, we have a bodyguard. That's our guru. Keep the guru close, and we'll find that even if we get off course, he'll bring us back. He won't lose sight of us if we don't lose sight of him. So keep that close. And I hope keep some of these thoughts in mind for as we go through our daily activities.